So what if I told you there was a composer in the 18th century who was a master of the violin and the clavier, renowned orchestral director across all of Europe, a champion fencer, and a chevalier in the court of Louis XVI? Yeah, I'd believe that. Sure. But then, what if I told you that he was a black man who had a singular influence upon Mozart, who won the affections of Marie Antoinette, and then who led a legion of black people and people of color in the French Revolution against the nobility? I'd be curious to hear his story, wouldn't you? Well, I would too. So buckle up. Right now, I want to tell you the story of Joseph Bologne, better known perhaps as the Chevalier de Saint-Georges. Now, the story of our hero begins on a plantation in what is now Haiti. He was born to Georges de Boulogne Saint-Georges and Nanon. They were a plantation owner and his wife's slave, so yeah, that's totally not a problematic relationship. Now, that being said, Joseph likely led a relatively sheltered life at his home, right up until his douchebag father shipped him off to school in Paris at a ripe old age of 7 years old. Fast forward a few years, and his father moves over to Paris himself, along with Nanon, so they can live together. A quick note, if it seems like I'm moving quickly, that's because I am. We don't actually know too much from his early life, and there's misinformation enough to go around as it is, so thank you, Roger Beauvoir, and your thrilling novel of nonsense. Anyhow, back to the story. Now, the big moment for Joseph came when his father shipped him off to another school at the age of 13. That was Tessier de Boissier's Polytechnic Academy for Fencing and Horsemanship. Now, the curriculum was pretty bog standard, the usual, like math, history, foreign languages, drawing, dance, music too. Excellent. Now, wouldn't it be great if modern curricula could actually have the funding and support for these kinds of things? Hey, it's a great idea, right? Now, after a few years at the school, once Joseph hits about 17 or so, he makes a big stir in France when he engages Alexandre Picard, a fencing master from Rouen, in a duel. Now, this guy Picard, he'd been mocking him for some time, making a big stink, basically calling him Boissier's mulatto, basically saying he was more a gimmick for the school than anything else. Now, our boy, he wouldn't have it, of course, so they throw down in a highly publicized duel that was heavily bet upon by French abolitionists and by pro-slavery partisans. Now, what Picard didn't know was that Joseph was actually the real deal, first of all, and that he was also a racist douchebag, but moving beyond that, that according to Boissier's son, Joseph, at 15, his progress was so rapid that he was already beating the very best swordsman, and that at 17, he had developed the greatest speed imaginable. So, with no surprise to us, Joseph handily destroyed him completely and won the attention of the nobility throughout Paris. After all, fencing apparently is what made you a noble, really. Duh. Now, not only had he made a name for himself, but his father rewarded him with a handsome horse and buggy. Not bad, sweet new ride. And he was appointed to the office of Cavalier, advisor to the king, and controller ordinary of wars, becoming a chevalier 8 years early before the minimum age. Well done to the lad. Well done and all that. Now, if only we had time to go over some of my stories from when I was 17. So here's Joseph Boulogne, effectively a noble without the title, or at least considered so, and elevated upon his graduation to the rank of gendarme du roi and celebrity in all of the Paris Salé. But where did his music start? Well, in the memorable and wise words of Ian McNeese's Baron Harkonnen, dunno. Oh, thank you, Cat. Well, up until his duel and his early 20s, there's really very little we can say for certain. You know how it is, the vast majority of incidental history comes to us in the form of receipts, so if we don't have those receipts, we don't know about it. But his first musical appearance on said receipts, nay, programs, was in the orchestra of François-Joseph Gossec, a French composer and big exponent of Bologne's. In 1769, at the age of 24, Joseph shows up impressing one audience after the other, with his performance of his own first two violin concertos. Now, the cool thing here is that from a lot of the audience commentaries, we see the whole range of everything. We see truly exultant adulations, like, these concertos were performed last winter at a concert of the amateurs by the author himself, who received great applause as much for their performance as for their composition. Now, that one was actually recorded in the Mercure de France, a popular gazette from the time. Then, of course, as one would expect, there were the backhanded, casually racist comments, just like this one, which was unearthed by Gabriel. The celebrated Saint-Georges, mulatto fencer and violinist, created a sensation in Paris when 2 years later, at the Concert Spirituel, he was appreciated not as much for his compositions as for his performances, enrapturing especially the feminine members of the audience. No, real talk though, racism is still really bad in the classical sphere, whatnot with all the elitism rampant and such, so I'm going to take this moment and recommend you just check out Instagram accounts or various accounts such as Opera is Racist or Orchestra is Racist, just to see a little bit more of what's going on, what I'm talking about, and of course about the work that we still really have to do. Now, I'm not going to go over every detail of his musical history because there's a lot to say, but if you want to check out a lot more for yourself, I'd highly recommend that you check out Gabriel Banat's Chevalier de Saint-Georges, virtuoso of the sword and bow. How's that for a title? I could use that as an epithet. But I would like to highlight just a couple things, just to show how absurdly successful he was in his own lifetime. Now, within 4 years of this appearance with the orchestra, he became concertmaster and conductor of that same orchestra, later succeeding Gossec as the director. Now, it was under his direction that the orchestra achieved a reputation for, quote, performing with the greatest precision and delicate nuances, and that it had become the best orchestra for symphonies in Paris and perhaps in all of Europe. Now, when the orchestra ran into financial troubles, he found financial support in his longtime fencing companion and friend, Philippe, the Duke of Chartres, who would later succeed his father as Philippe, the Duke of Orleans II. And yes, if you're very fast on your French Revolutionary history, that would make him the same Philippe who spearheaded the revolution. Now, with Philippe behind him, Bologne renamed the orchestra Les Concerts Olympiques, and with this orchestra, he performed at the Palais Royal regularly. He personally commissioned and performed the premiere of Haydn's Paris symphonies, and it was with this orchestra that he caught the eye of Marie Antoinette herself. Now, something we haven't really gone over in much detail is all the crap that Bologne must have faced as a man of mixed race. What, you're saying there was racism back then? Shocker. Yeah, we haven't gone over all the slurs, insults, and bullying, largely because we don't know too much about it. See what I was saying about receipts just a little while ago. However, with Bologne's ascension into the higher ranks of celebrity, we do begin to see signs of how his parentage held him back. In the late 70s, the directorship of the Paris Opera languished without any proper director, but naturally, with Bologne beginning to grace the very pinnacle of musical society, his name had been tossed around a great deal, even by Marie Antoinette herself, as a shoo-in for the role. The three leading ladies, however, had different ideas, and penned a letter to Marie saying that their honor and delicate conscience could never allow them to submit to the orders of a mulatto. Now, in order to spare Marie any embarrassment, Joseph actually withdrew his name from consideration. Now, let me just take a moment to underline the situation. There were no other choices. There was no, okay, then we pick this guy. No, Bologne was the first and last choice, and without him taking the role, since there wasn't any other Rameau or Lully rampaging in the streets, the seat remained empty. And basically Louis XVI had to sort of take control of the opera again and turn it into his own private company. We actually see this kind of thing today still, so again, I'm going to direct you to those Instagram accounts, basically just to see a little bit more of what's still happening today. But likewise, I also want to highlight, for example, Black Women in Opera. It's an amazing account that I highly recommend, because it actually shows off a lot of the people that we should be celebrating and who should be making headlines a lot more, and yet for inexplicable reasons, don't seem to make the headlines as much as their white counterparts. But do check them out. They're amazing. Now, naturally, I'd like to get on to talking about his music, but I just want to point out that this roadblock for operas and him making operas, that actually didn't stop him whatsoever. He kept on trucking. In fact, after having composed string quartets, symphonies, concertos, and the whole list, he decided he would compose just operas from this point onwards, and he wrote 6. Sadly, we don't have too many of them extant, but what we do have is rather fabulous stuff. There are still tons of more juicy stories about his life, like where he was personally coordinating with William Wilberforce and John Wilkes, the popular English abolitionists from the time, so he could help organize Les Amis des Noirs in France. Also, there are even stories about how he personally foiled assassination attempts on his life with multiple assailants, single-handedly dismantling them. Amazing stuff. As I was saying, check out that history of his. It reads like an action novel at points. But with that said, I'll put all that information in the description, and yeah, in the meantime, let's get on to talking a little bit more about his music. So his music was clearly very well beloved throughout Paris and a good chunk of Europe. Now, he made the papers regularly in France for his operas. His other music was performed throughout the Salé regularly, and he was even commonly featured at the Palais Royal. Not bad, right? So clearly the received opinion of our boy was at least 10 Telemans out of 10 Telemans. And yes, friends, we are totally making the Telemann scale a thing. Now, I bring up received value for 2 reasons. The first is I'm sure there were some academics waiting in the wings for those magic words. And secondly, is to point out just how absolutely ridiculous it is that music historians seem to have forgotten a composer who was that successful in his own lifetime. For so much of the 18th century, there was a particular word that was ascribed to nearly everything, anything ranging from shoes to shirts to haircuts and to music. And it basically indicated whatever was de rigueur, or emblematic of fashion. And that word was gallant. Now, I've got way too much to say about that word. I did, like, half of my thesis was actually about that word and what it meant. But basically what it boils down to is how we use cool. So, what was musically cool in the mid to late 18th century was the newer style, and the style gallant, which, for simplicity's sake, I'll describe here as having a clear, elegant melody, highlighted with exciting, yet often familiar gestures, all of which was usually set over a simple choral accompaniment. Now, one of the most fascinating things about so much music in this time is exactly how it was taught and understood as a performative device of its own. Not like how, you're performing music, sure. No, it was a performative device in that it was a medium through which, like, your average courtier or, like, any noble person could demonstrate how sophisticated they were. And if you're a nerd like me and want to learn a little bit more about how they actually taught this stuff and how it was understood by the gentry and even by musicians at the time, you'll want to dig into Robert Gördingen's Music in the Gallant Style. It's an incredible book where he basically covers like a kind of modular understanding of the music at the time and how it was contextualized in a kind of improvisatory tradition that we just don't have anymore. Now, for a moment, in terms of Bologne's music, I want you to take a second and listen for this. Listen for the gesture and fluency in his melody. Listen for the way that it sort of asks you to interact with it, invites you to try to understand it, and then takes you on a journey, while the entire time setting it over an elegant but lovely accompaniment. Now, I can imagine what many of you have already been thinking, which is, that sounds like Mozart. So, yeah, that's the thing. Bologne has largely earned the moniker in academic circles and especially in popular circles of the Black Mozart. which is absurd for so many reasons, and I'm sure you can tell it's very problematic, but let me highlight just a few reasons why. First, we've already established that he was very much an authority on his own, popular, influential as a composer. And by the way, just to further underline that point a little bit more, he traveled internationally regularly, especially regularly to England. He was very well known throughout Europe, and he was even well known in the States. Like the president then, John Adams, he actually is quoted as having described Bologne as the most successful man in Europe. Not bad, right? Second, as I'm sure many of you have already guessed, the term relegates Bologne and his successes basically to a footnote, a musical footnote, literally whitewashing his successes and casting it in the shadow of Mozart, the white genius from the time period. And thirdly, and I would argue most interestingly, not only did Mozart live with and learn from Bologne, more than a few musical tricks there, by the way, he was very likely jealous of Bologne and his successes. Now, just to expand on this a little bit, since Bologne didn't have the luxury of, independent living, and couldn't own property himself, hey there, Code Noir, what's up? He spent a good portion of his adult life living in the estate of Philippe's father, then the Duke of Orleans. During his stay, he met a young Mozart who had come to Paris with his mother to make a start to his career. Unfortunately for Mozart, his mother died fairly early in the trip, and these became some of his darker days, which historians have referred to many times. However, during this time, he lived on the same estate as Bologne for many months, and there, in person, he witnessed the exact successes that he himself had longed for, the reasons why he had come to Paris. He saw Bologne's popular acclaim, he saw the easy affability he'd attained with the nobility, and finally, most of all, of course, he had earned the affections of Marie Antoinette. Now, did Mozart pick up any musical tricks? Sure, actually he did. For those theory nerds amongst you, I'm sure you may associate the Sinfonia Concertante with Mozart a great deal. I mean, when I was coming up through music theory, that's pretty much the main thing we studied when we were actually looking at Mozart. But really, that whole genre was more or less the Chevalier's brainchild before Mozart. And if you look really closely, you'll see his influences in Mozart's compositions. In particular, what you want to check out is Mozart's Sinfonia Concertante in E-flat for violin and viola, and then compare that to Bologne's. I guarantee you're going to see something pretty similar. And yet, despite all of this, somehow music historians have elected to focus all of their musical insight and efforts upon Mozart. You could argue that Mozart wrote more than Bologne. Sure, he did. But let's examine it for just a moment. Why did Bologne write less? Well, aside, I guess, from being the heir apparent to the throne of music, or at least as some music historians would have us describe, Mozart, he didn't do too much other than compose and party some more, compose and party a little bit more. Whereas Bologne, Saint-Georges, he was just, a little occupied, exercising his civic duties, taking part in the French Revolution and leading an entire legion of black people and people of color against the nobility. Oh yeah, and did I mention that during that entire time, he actually insisted on still composing and performing the whole time, in addition to his military duties. No wonder he composed a little bit less. He was a little busy, huh? Therefore, rather than dub him the Black Mozart, as have so many nowadays, I would rather instead take a page out of Bill Barclay's book. That's the music director of Shakespeare's Globe. He was quoted in an interview as describing Mozart, as the White Chevalier. Me, on the other hand, I would rather the White Bologne. Now finally, I do just want to say I'm not making this video to tear down Mozart necessarily. What I want to highlight first of all is exactly how in music we still have so many problems. Not only in the actual elitist performative ways that classical music is done, or even the way that people describe other performers. I also want to highlight exactly how music education could use another look, specifically with regards to how we characterize the music that we see and how we privilege particular composers over others for often arbitrary reasons, and how that can very much warp our understanding of music, but also imbue fundamentally racist perspectives on music history. As I said before, you definitely want to check out some of those accounts that I was talking about. There's a lot of work to be done, but even better than that, there are so many artists who we need to celebrate because they do such incredible work and they are criminally overlooked on the regular basis. And that's not to mention they're, regularly passing mistreatment, but at the hands of critics, other musicians, directors, you name it. As a personal note to all of my musical friends and peers, what I would say is this: perform more Bologne. Absolutely do. Perform more of his music. It's fantastic stuff. I've gone through as many recordings as I can find. The music you've been hearing actually comes from the only album that I really like. Most of them are, I think, pretty lackluster. However, for some reason, we're not seeing that many more recordings being made of him. They seem to be dwindling in the shadow of the ever-growing mountain of Mozart albums that we keep seeing pop up on Spotify, and yeah, you get the picture. So play more of his music. Explore music beyond the classic greats. I should probably make a rant about the classics too, shouldn't I? But finally, check out more of Bologne's music. It's all fabulous. A lot of fun to play, even if you kind of hack your way at it like I do. Speaking of behind the scenes, if you want to get an inside look at the way that things work with me, or actually communicate with me on my whole process, and even maybe give me further suggestions, vote on a few things, check out my Patreon. All that information is in the link below. I'll have some stuff on the website, and I'll have some stuff here on YouTube in the future, but you can get a lot more there, and honestly, you'd be helping an artist keep things going. So again, thanks to my wonderful patrons. They've literally kept the roof over my head and helped me actually keep the strings on my instruments. So I can't thank them enough. So join me, help me out, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace out.